Gallery 101 honors and respects the original people of our territory where we currently are occupying. It is the unceded and surrendered Anishinaabe Ake who have been living and working on this land for time immemorial. And we're also very grateful to the City of Ottawa, the Ontario Arts Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, and the Trillium Foundation for providing us with operating funding and the funding for programming so that we can pay artist fees to this illustrious group of artists. I'm so happy that we got to partner with OBAK, the Ottawa Black Artists Collective, and specifically with Sakinna Gairey, who I am going to pass the baton over to her to talk about this show, We Live as We Die, and the fabulous artists that are part of it. Thank you. And thank you, Sakinna.
Awesome. Thank y'all very much. I think Laura did mention, but just repeat for everyone that this is recording, so feel free to turn on or off your towels as you want. Before we do get started, I do want to kind of just add on to Laura's land acknowledgement and just really, really push on people to think about what that means specifically to them. Land back is not like a thing that's not real. It's not even necessarily just a hope. It is a thing that will happen. And I really do want to invite people to think about things like that as upcoming realities and sit down and think about where you're going to be when that happens, because it's very important, and where you're going to be to make sure that that does happen. So I'm really happy to have everybody here. I'm super thankful to OBAK as well. Shout out to Monique. I don't know if she's on here, but none of this would have happened without Monique. So thank you all very much for being a part. Thank you for coming through. I'm not going to take up too much time either, because I want to moderate and hand it off to all of our wonderful artists here. So I'm just going to start. Before we start, actually, one more thing. So Christina is Gallery 101 Christina with the G101 icon, and we will be taking questions at the end. So if you do have questions, I invite you to please just message her. You hit chat on the bottom of the screen where it says more. If you can't see the chat button, then write chat, put your message to Gallery Christina, and write whatever you want in the Q&A or whatever questions you want to her. And then she will pop them in a document for us, and we'll read them out at the end if we have time. And so yeah, with that, I'm gonna pass it off. I'm gonna go alphabetically, which means Ayo's up first. Everyone feel free to introduce yourself and say a little bit about your piece.
Hi everyone, my name's Ayo. I use they, them pronouns. I'm toying around with he, tacking that on, so we'll see how that feels. I'm a visual artist based in Toronto right now, originally from Ghana and Lesotho. I'm also Yoruba. My name translates to Joy of the Mountains. Ayo Tsalithaba is how you pronounce it. And yeah, I kind of want to jump into it. So you'll probably hear me talk a little bit more about my piece later, but my pieces are part of a project called In His Image, which are a grief-based reflection on how freaking much I look like my dad. And so, yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but hi, everyone.
Thanks. Delali, you're up next.
Hey, everyone. My name is Delali. I'm Delali Cofie, and I'm a photographer currently living in Toronto as well. Also from Ghana and Nigeria. And my image or my piece is Curtain Call, which displays an image from a series of mine called Angel, which was photographed in 2018 as a tribute to a friend of mine who passed away, and a first encounter with grief at, let's say, at an age where I could really rationalize what I was feeling.
And because I do know the alphabet, the next person is Kalkidan. Okay.
Yeah, what's up? My name is Kalkidan. I also go by Cal. I also go by Drip and Soul, he, him pronouns. And I'm a muralist, visual artist, painter. I do a lot of things. And in this particular exhibition, I submitted a painting on canvas, which I haven't done in a while. So it was really nice to kind of go back to canvas. And I mean, this is a self-portrait. And for me, it's kind of the battle between like the unrelenting inevitability of death versus my own search for meaning. in life that's kind of disconnected from the spiritual practices of my ancestors while still being a reflection of them, if that makes sense. But I'll talk about it more. So thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And see, I did get it wrong alphabetically. Jalen, you're also. Jalen, you
Hello.
All right, there we go.
Oh, okay, boom. Hello, my name is Jalen Frizzell. I am a tattoo artist and painter. I do some sewing sometimes, but that's a new thing. But yeah, I've been tattooing for 7 years out in Montreal and throughout Canada. This is my piece. It's called Grief Eater / Good Morning, which is, you know, basically an amalgamation of like tattoo influences mixed with I guess like the lack of vocabulary that exists in tattooing for images of Afro descendants and Black folks. Yeah, I created this painting just coming from a place of trying to find tools of coping with grief and hopelessness. So yeah, I'll talk more about that later as well. Hello.
Hello. And that brings us, I believe, to our last person who's here right now, although I do also want to give a shout out to Yassine. I don't think he's here, but he was also part of the exhibit. And with that, we will go to our final artist, Mariama.
Hello, my name is Mariama, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a visual artist, originally from Somalia. My piece is sort of, I guess, inspired by the ways various different cultures, particularly Black culture, celebrate death versus viewing it as sort of like an end, but almost like a beginning or a chapter of something new. I grew up Muslim, and something that like was always told to me or reiterated to me a lot was like, oh, like when people die, like they have the next life, you know, and it was always viewed almost like a positive thing, like they kind of escaped from the hardships of life. So I think that's kind of like what my piece stems from.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And that totals our introductions, which means we get to get into our questions. And I'm gonna pull up for Io again. So, and we can pull up another picture of one of Io's pieces, but what stood out to me, aside from many things, your art was amazing. What stood out to me was the very intentional use of color and contrast in the piece. And I remember like looking at like the very details, I was hanging it up and being like, oh, there's a word here, there's a tiny little line there, and it was like the bright purple on that bottom one as well. The color seemed very intentional to me. So yeah, you can see it in the bottom right. But I'd love for you to expand and talk about what inspired those colors and wording choices and what do they represent?
Totally. I'm gonna preface this by saying that my Wi-Fi is really spotty. So if I cut out at all, I'll be back. You can talk about something else or with someone else, or you can show one of the mini cats on the Zoom. I'd love that until I get back. So yeah, the pieces like all go together. They use the same fundamental like photographs as kind of like an anchor. And so this piece over here that you see on the screen is a mixed media. It's like a digital art piece. So I'm all about talking about my process. So I started by taking a photo based on a photo of my dad from circa 1975, not entirely sure of the year, but he looked really, really cool. And I think he was like 17 or something when the photo was taken. And I'm just describing it. I'm not going to show it to you because I think that it's cool, but you can kind of see it over there. Where he's like shirtless, wearing bell bottoms, like all the way to the ground with what seems to be like really high boots underneath. And he's carrying a bag on his shoulder that's like full of something. Like it looks like it could be fruits, like round fruits, like oranges or whatever, or like calabashes. And he has sunglasses on. And it's like, and a mini fro, and it's the coolest picture ever. I wish everyone could see it, but I tried to do it justice by recreating it, because after he passed away, I realized like I was starting to look a lot like him, a lot more than I did before. And so in this piece in particular, and in everything that I was doing, I was kind of trying to find ways to not just be really like simple with a thing, because it like I had already done like little side by sides. And so a piece where I just edit like a side by side of photos of my dad and I together is just a random thing that I would do on my phone. But I really wanted to be intentional with the way that I reflected on these images alongside one another. I scaled them so that we would be the same size. I put us kind of facing in opposite directions. And then I have this like very strange rupture happening in the background behind us with a little bit of an asterisk. And a lot of my digital art kind of took a turn during the pandemic, because, and if you were to look at all of my pieces next to each other, you'll notice just extreme darkness and just kind of like brooding, kind of ominous vibes with bright pops of color, mostly because I kind of want some things to get lost in the background and in the foreground. And to blur that a little bit, I integrate photos in all sorts of ways into my illustrations. So if you look at the bottom, I guess, right corner, you'll see like a reddish blue photograph. And that's a photo that's taken, actually, it's like a large fountain that my dad built, with like with the little birds they used to call his birds that would go drink out of the fountain, and he's buried underneath it actually. And so and I haven't been able to go visit his resting place because of Ghana's extreme anti-queer imminent legislation. So that's been really stressful for me, and it's kind of like woken me up out of my sleep. Kind of wanted this piece to feel a little bit like a fever dream, like if you were to wake up and look over and not quite know who you were looking at, because that's kind of how it felt, like deep in the throes of grief when I was like looking at my own face and seeing my dad. And in the other piece with the clear, I kind of consider that its own piece, yeah, with the clear background. There's the original photograph, contrasty black and white. I really like the colors, but I was like, it feels punchier if it's just black and white. Some of this is aesthetic, some of it means something. The orange and blue, there's no meaning behind that. It's just cool together. And I lowered the opacity there so that the photo of my dad and I could kind of like blend into each other. But I also have the photo of my dad kind of looking a little bit obscure because there's something like fuzzy about memory. The image itself was quite low quality. It's a photo that my mom took on her phone of a photograph that I haven't been able to go and see. And so there's a little bit of the intangibility there. And I really wanted this to interact with the space around it. I wanted people to be able to interact with it. But I also wanted it to look like you could overlay or have them all interact with each other. So that's that. And I love how it goes like with the film that was playing. That was really beautiful, and I really love that.
Shout out to Mariama. Yeah, no, I remember like bringing people up the stairs on the opening night, and there's an angle when once you get up the stairs that you're just like, oh, and it just kind of comes together, and that realization was like always really cool to see have happen.
And there's like a warp too that happens with it that was unintentional, but I think really works with some of the clear pieces, because I don't know, it feels kind of like messy and like organic in a way, in as much of a way as clear, like super chemically paper can feel. So
yeah, no, it really did. And that kind of brings us to a piece that I mentioned, which is Mariama, who did our film piece. And so Mariama, my question for you is, your piece started off really strongly, and I remember like literally just like watching it and being like, yeah, this is it. What were you looking for when you were searching for like relevant pieces of media?
I honestly was just looking for things that I guess resonated with the pieces and point that I was trying to make. The videos of like celebration and just people sort of feeling like relief with stuff. I guess that's sort of like what I looked for. But also I think I wanted it to feel a bit lighthearted and almost comical, I guess, in a way. Like I just wanted to feel like, because I think like the way that people talk about death usually is very like, obviously it's very, very depressing, and I wanted to kind of feel different from that. And so I guess that's what I was looking for, media that sort of like resembled how I felt about it. And I guess like from my own experience, my uncle, he died during the civil war in Somalia. He was shot, and so the way that my mom would always talk about his death was always like, because obviously like the civil war was going on, she would always be like she was kind of happy for him that he had like a really good funeral and that people showed up for him, and like the way she talked about it is always very positive, and it was never like a negative thing. I think I kind of wanted my piece to feel like that, where it was like finding the joy in grief, I guess. And yeah, so I guess that's sort of where that stems from. And then with the sort of discussion that I had with my friends, so it's kind of like a last minute addition. I was making the piece, and originally it was just going to be like a bunch of pieces of media that I found, and then I just felt like it was missing something. So I asked my friends to come over, and I was like, can I just ask you guys about like your thoughts on grief and your, and if I could record it. And that's what I did. And everything they said was just so amazing and brilliant. I feel like it paired really well with the piece. So I just ended up adding that over the images that I found.
Yeah, the layering of like the interview actually made such a difference, I think, in the piece. I can't quite imagine it without it, because yeah, it really did like get you through the certain parts, and you're just like, oh yeah, it sounded like I'm talking to my friends and I'm hearing what they have to say. Yeah, I don't know if that's ever going to be online anywhere, but y'all should look up, because I will personally keep watching the piece over and over. Yeah, Kalkidan, you're on the hot seat. As you mentioned already, you haven't done pieces on canvas in a while. I haven't seen you do a canvas piece before, so this is really new to me, and I haven't seen you do a self-portrait before either. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, but to contextualize my question, I know when you and I had started talking about you potentially being part of the exhibit, you were like, I'm a nihilist. I don't know if that's gonna fit. And I was like, no, I think that's actually like exactly why it fits. So I'm curious to see like what had you turn the paintbrush on yourself for this, and talk to me a little bit more about like that perspective and what you were thinking and bringing yourself into your piece.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I was like really kind of excited by this opportunity because I have so many like weird mixed feelings about death, and especially with the pandemic in the past few years, just kind of feeling like surrounded by death and in many ways. But I think any conversation about death is also kind of about life, and invariably like the meaning of both. So for me, like when I was thinking about that, I felt like death is kind of a singularly like personal experience, that you can have. Like nobody will tell you what it feels like or can tell you what to expect. And like in the past, I think it was the norm for spiritual beliefs and religious practice to dominate that conversation about how you like live your life and in anticipation of death, and now we live in a society that's kind of moving so quickly. It's in a state of flux, and like meaning is found more in material things than spiritual. At least that's how I feel we're living. And it's not really about what you do while you live as much as what you have while you live. So for me, when I was thinking about this particular subject and myself and death, there was like this disconnect between like the religious and, very faith-based dogmatic lens that my people, my Ethiopian Orthodox ancestors, Christian ancestors viewed death as, and like where I'm finding myself. And I find like my spirituality is more of a questioning spirituality. And at the end of the day, like questions aren't the same as beliefs or faith, so the whole experience of living can kind of feel like meaningless when you're just dealing with questions and not answers. with when you want answers, at least for me. So that's why I represented myself kind of in the imagery. It's directly inspired by this iconography I grew up on. It's the story of a saint called Gabra Memphis Kadus in Ethiopia. And in the folklore, he's basically this dude that like went wandering in the desert for many years, and he was preaching peace to the wild beasts. And one characteristic of his depiction is that he has like a bird flying at eye level, as the story goes, because he found it dying of thirst and he allowed it to drink the water from his eyes, right? So it's like this story of like a very deeply spiritual man, and kind of juxtaposing myself with that, because that's where like our tradition led us to believe, but I'm kind of disconnected from that. So for me, like I was saying, the self-portrait is kind of the battle between the inevitability of death and my own search for meaning, where like the skull side is just death and it's inevitable and that's just the finality of it. And then the other side is kind of like searching for meaning, trying to find that water in the desert, you know? So yeah, that's kind of what that was about.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember when you posted on Instagram, I literally like went to the reference picture and I was like, I'm gonna like reverse image search this because now I need to know all of these details. So thank you for expanding on that, because that was always something I was like, I got like bits and pieces from websites, but your story is definitely better told. Yeah, and this actually brings us, I want to like tell a tiny story. So Kalkidan brought his piece on the installation day, freshly done. It was beautiful. I was like, wow, this is so amazing, so exciting. Jalen, who's kind of up next, had shipping stuff going on with their piece, so it was on the way and we had missed it, but it was going to come back the next day. So we're trying to figure out where everything goes. And Jalen's piece is like arrives, thankfully, like perfectly on time. I open it and I'm just like, these two pieces go like side by side, and I like had to pull you out to talk to them about it because I was like, you guys said, sorry, that I know have not met, and I hadn't seen either of the pieces before they got here. So it's just so very interesting to see like the contrast, but also like complement between the two of them. Which brings me to Jalen, your question, which is your piece is so rich with symbolism and stories. Like there is a ridiculous amount of detail in everything. And I think it's like very intentional, obviously. How did you build your narrative and translate it visually?
Let me unmute myself. Hello, yes, this piece. It's funny too, like the connection that you made between the two paintings being across from each other, because also like I connect with like not really interacting with physical art as much. Like I'm a tattoo artist, so I tattoo skin, but this is the first painting I'd done in a while as well. And yeah, I drew a lot of this imagery from like really existing tattoo culture. In a way, there's a lot of like existing vocabulary, particularly depicting like body suits, and like a lot of spiritual deities, which is really interesting in itself, because as soon as you put art to skin, it is impermanent and it deals with life and death. But yeah, this piece in particular comes from my tattoo background. During the 2020 like pandemic moment where everyone was brought inside to shelter, it was actually a really transformative time for me because I gained access to a lot of online spaces that particularly centered Black queer spirituality. And it was really amazing. Some of the tools that I was given during that time were tools like meditation, visualization. I received like online Reiki, like lots of really amazing connections with hoodoo healers and spiritualists from all over the world. And yeah, just that contrast of like hope, connection, but being trapped inside, and the tools that were given, the news was changing, so many things we've all lived through. I can't really even, like the insurrection could be one of them, that are like key moments where, you know, everyone was feeling this collective grief and at the same time being allowed to speak truths that we all got used to kind of putting behind us. So anyways, in one of my moments of hopelessness, I went to visualization, meditation, and I visualized a snake. Had been learning more about how like there aren't just physical barriers that keep oppression alive, but there's also psychic barriers, spiritual barriers. So in the midst of all this grief, in the midst of all this hopelessness, in the midst of us all feeling these things together, what is made of it, you know? So yeah, that kind of brings me back to the moment imagining the snake, because the snake meditation that I allowed myself to think of was something that would give me a lot of peace. Just imagining, you know, a creature that's able to break through any spiritual, psychic boundaries and placed on, you know, us as a people for generations. And I think that's also why with this creature, it has 3 heads. I actually imagine this creature to be like the creation of our collective grief. That's why there's 3 separate heads. You have like the past, the present, and the future. I also align this with like a few stages of grief. So here you have like mourning and grief as the past. You have the present, which is kind of like fully there, fully, I wanted it to be like catching you in your gaze and like feeling what you feel. And then you have the future, which is like intense wrath, rage. Wrath could be like action, you know, moving forward. The 3 heads also represent 2 methods of thought. So you have Afro-pessimism, which would be on the left, Afro-surrealism, which is in the middle, and Afrofuturism, which is on the right. Afro-surrealism is a really cool concept because it's actually about being in the present and making something out of the present. Whereas like Afro-pessimism, you know, being a bit more like, what are we gonna do? It's gone so deep. In Afrofuturism being like this radical imagination. Afro-surrealism is like in the center, being like, what do we make of the now? So yeah, that's a few of the imagery. I also imagined this creature to be in a pool of tears. That's what the water represents. The water's a little bit green because I only chose to use the Pan-African colors to make this painting. So you'll notice the yellow, the black, the red, the green is true to that. There's 2 sides of the painting as well. You can see on the right side, along with the wrath, along with the futurism, that's where the death actually is. There's the skulls. And then on the right, you have the Egyptian lotus, which kind of represents life. I imagine this creature actually being able to transmute grief into something else, which is why it's in the tears and why it's able to transform death to life. There's also the conch shell in the center, which we know with the Haitian Revolution is like a symbol of freedom and overcoming. So yeah, I chose to put that in the center. This creature, like I said, can create and transmute feelings. So it makes sense that that would be at the heart of it. And then at the top, you have the locust, which I see as like a symbol of like suffering, death, destruction. We know too that like locusts impact our environment in really serious ways. And then the butterfly is on the other side, again, representing transformation. And those are some of the images, so.
No, yeah, I remember like reading your piece and just being like, oh, I can actually literally like just point to each singular thing and like know exactly what it comes from and what it's about, which is really neat. It's very, very in depth.
Thank you. There was one other thing too I want to mention is I've just mentioned now the hairstyles have a significance. Like for example, the Afro-pessimism or the past, that's a traditional Fulani hairstyle. On that aspect of the cobra in the center, you have the cobra that has their hair like half finished, half on the go, you know. So I just brought those images in to represent time, and then you have the Bantu knots and the braids to represent the future. So that's everything.
Very nice. Yeah, also the exhibit is open until November 5th. I feel like this is a great time to plug that. The watercolors on those hairstyles are really exceptional. So go ahead and if you are in Ottawa, take a look close up. And that brings us to Delali. Well, I'm going to scroll down on my little Zoom because I want to be able to see your face. There we go. Hello. I feel like the medium of the message was a really big part of like what we worked on with your piece. I think I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway and say, do you feel like that affected the perception of the piece? And specifically for you, because a lot of us created like new work, but for you, I was just like, I actually know exactly what I want. Sorry. What was the process like for you to bring an older piece of work back to life? So two-part question.
Hey, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you for your question. And first off, everyone, it's so beautiful to like listen to the layers that go into your pieces. It's like, it's very like inspiring and just touching to be able to hear like from all of you. So thank you. Yeah, revisiting an older image, especially an image that was taken like, let's say a year into me doing photography, was kind of surreal. Because at that time, you obviously, aside from like still learning things like technique and everything, I was sort of approaching like everything I was doing with it with a kind of freedom, you know, and innocence, because I wasn't really overthinking things too much. But I guess the benefit of returning to it now is that after having, I guess, more like a life experience and just experiencing growth as an artist, like I can return to this older work with like new words, new meaning, and just a better way of like of understanding what I was trying to do back then. And for me, it's like it was mind blowing. Like the image itself. Well, first off, like the piece is a different title than like the image, which answers, I guess, your question of the medium being the message. Being printed on fabric, an image of the subject, who is like in the image itself, whose like his face is covered with the tent. It, to me, it sort of created this like visceral and yet kind of spiritual like presence in the space, like walking in and seeing the image kind of moving because of the door being open. It felt like there was something there, you know, and especially having it like kind of showing on the other side too, like at the back of the image, but very faintly, and having people walk around, kind of showing the image some sort of respect. It was an interesting way of having this piece like be brought to life in a way, no pun intended.
Good
But this image, which initially was called Loss of Self, is from the series Angel. Around that time in 2018, I had lost my friend and I had lost my grandfather, and I was thinking about so much. And I think now, like looking back, I think I approached this, I guess you can call it like a shoot, a series of images, as like a two-part conversation, because I was photographing the subject both like from my perspective and like from the perspective of like the subject, like the person who is in sort of limbo and like, or like in purgatory in a sense, I don't know, in like final moments, something like that. And to me, it's like starting to see less and less of like a familiar, you know, face or familiar presence. And for the subject, it's like losing themselves in a way, right? So having that dual conversation, which I feel like is kind of similar with like relationships we have in life and like death, right? Like obviously it's happening on two fronts. So yeah, I think, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. No, that was great. Thank you. It was really great just being able to see that on the cloth. That was amazing. That brings us to our general questions portion. A wonderful reminder, if you have questions that you would like to ask the artist, please do send them to Gallery Christina. Her name is Christina, but on Zoom, you're going to deal with Gallery 101, Christina. And if you have questions, send them over. I have questions, so obviously I'm going to ask them. And so For folks, I will just say, if you all know how to use the little reaction thing, send me a reaction if you want to answer the question, just so I make sure that I can get to everybody. That's for the artists. And I'll start off and just say, how does your artistic practice generally interact with the concept of life and death? I'll go for it. Other folks, put up your hands if you want to answer.
Hi. Yeah. I feel like it's kind of funny. Like, it feels like it goes without saying, but my artistic practice is like has everything to do with my life. But it wasn't until going through like major grief, actually slightly before like losing my dad, that everything just had to go into my art in a particular way. When I was younger, I used to make greeting cards, and it was just because I was like had a hard time. There was like cutesy greeting cards with puns and stuff. It's because I had a hard time accessing my emotions, and I didn't really want to tell people how much I cared about them. So I was just like, I might as well just become a vessel for people to tell each other how they feel about themselves. Like, I like you more than I like bacon, or like, I care about you, and there's like a bunch of kale, right? But like now, I think about my actual real anxieties about life and death, and how there was a really important period of my life, like when I was in grad school, actually, where I was like constantly thinking, and I needed my artistic practice, or else. Like, it was like, if I didn't have it, I felt trapped within myself and my body. And it was like incorporating myself into my work has been a huge part of like forcing me to live, and forcing me to like acknowledge the life in myself and in my body, because there's a certain kind of disconnect that I had for a very long time, not feeling like myself. And then I started dealing with like intense restlessness, because grad school is like, for some people it's a good idea, but for me it was like, it was silly. It was like, I mean, I did it for a reason and I don't regret it, but like, it was extremely taxing, like emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. And there were moments where I was like extremely restless. And then when my dad passed away, there was like a very strange, it was just like a strange, like anchoring or continually rooted feeling, where it was like I was already dying and I didn't know how I could survive. And then my dad died, and I was like, I feel like I'm dying all over again. And I wrote that into my work a lot. Watch out, because I want to try and publish it somewhere. And if you're Black, you'll probably, you'll just get a free copy if you want one. But there was pieces that I was writing where I was kind of angry at the institution for needing or demanding something like intellectually rigid from me when I was going through something so awful, in order for me to graduate. Like, my supervisor was great, my friends, my partner, my family were awesome and supportive, but there was this like institutional force that was like, you have to submit this if you want to graduate. And then there's also like the government that's like, if you want to immigrate here, you have to be like an academic in a particular way, because it's the only, like, you've already gone far enough in this pathway. So for me, it felt like out of spite, I had to write into my work, I am dying. And I became very unafraid of death. Also, when every person who wasn't Black in 2020 realized that Black people are dying en masse, I became unafraid of death, because I was like, no, fuck it, I'll die for this shit. And then when my dad passed away, I was like, oh my God, I was like, someone near me can die. It was like unbelievable to me. But I was also seeing my dad in my dreams. So I was like, I'm not afraid of death, because it feels comforting to have another ancestor. And so my artistic practice became indispensable to my life and death, because I do think that there are like many deaths that happen. And I feel like I've died many times because I'm not the person that I could have become had I gone a certain path, or had some awful trauma not happened to me, had I not been stifled by like real, like, institutional crap. And so like, there's a part of me that dies every time I log on to the Canadian government website, because I'm like, oh, there's a part of me that died when I didn't know to be true to myself in particular ways. So my artistic practice becomes like, is haunting in a lot of ways, but it's like the thing about haunting is that there is still a presence there. So there is life where I'm like, I feel like sometimes I'm living because in the way that a ghost is living, because there's like, well, it's there. Doesn't mean it's like beat it, like the heart is beating and it's working, but it's there. There's something that is insistent on being around you. And that's kind of what I feel like sometimes. So
Thank you. Yeah, no, that really like hit it on the head with life and death. It's not quite as binary or start and stop as anybody really thinks. Thank you. Kalkidan.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question because it made me kind of reflect on my practice, and that was something I think I needed after just the pandemic and many years of kind of doing what I do. So just to give a bit of background, like I do a lot of murals, and in my practice, it's just kind of become something that I have to do with a lot of like dedication murals for people who passed on. So like I do deal with death in my practice quite often. And I think like, the dedication mural is something that's kind of like culturally specific, especially for those of us who grew up in like hip hop and in the Black community. And like, this is, the graffiti artist's way of being able to like honor and celebrate people's lives and amplify their lives, especially for people who are on the margins and who don't necessarily get the kind of like mainstream obituaries and recognition that other people might get in their life. So, doing that kind of work is a kind of a weird position to be in because it's not like something I generally take joy in. And I mean, especially with the circumstances of like police brutality or, violence that, affects disproportionately Black folks. So that's kind of work I've done, and Sakinna knows this because I think when we met, it was with the Sandra Bland mural. That was like 7 years ago now, something like that, 2015. So, and like I've done many since then, and it's kind of like something that my practice is built on because I feel like it's my, it's my platform to be able to offer that to people. But at the same time, I get a lot of mixed feelings about that because it's like sad to kind of have to do the same thing again and again and again, like I'd be very happy to never have to do another RIP mural for somebody killed by the police, so yeah, I think it was just, it made me reflect a little bit on that and my situation with death. And I think that's kind of why I have so many mixed feelings around death sometimes, so I hope that answers the question.
It does. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that you've definitely been around for as far as being a part of that. And shout out to the Sandra Bland mural. It doesn't stop, but it was a great moment for dedication. And Kalkidan was like, this is just me kind of shout out to you, honestly, because you came in and you repainted that as many times as was necessary to get a message shown that was important and ended up being important to that person's family and people around them. So it's hard responsibility, I feel like, and can't really call it work, but a hard responsibility. And it was a time. I think that's everybody for this question. I'll give it a, Jalen, you look like you're trying to unmute yourself, or no, you're clapping. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I tried to do the reaction, but I got a clap in. Okay, I also want to touch base on this question, just because my practice is primarily tattooing, but like I think being in like a neo-colonial this Western world that isn't actually that old, tattooing in particular, actually coming from Black and Brown Indigenous people, like it being on Black skin before it was ever on white skin, and being in a neo-colonial westernized scope where Black folks are being like reintroduced to serious tattoo collecting or like being safe to get tattoos, even like within the realms of their own communities and the way that respectability politics is played out and stuff. Like I just want to speak on this subject because with my piece, there's also like the like what to do with all of these feelings. Like sometimes how hope can feel so hard to access with all the information at hand, all the deaths that we see, but also like I just wanted to touch on the fact that like this vocabulary that I've used in a tattoo context is not really in the tattoo industry because of the process of removing practices from our own like daily lives. And yeah, I guess I just found that important to speak on, because when I do tattoos and I do images of Black folks who don't look ambiguously Black, it makes people so happy. It brings them so much joy. And like, to BH, I feel a lot of grief in that with some of these knowings, you know, with knowing that like, this is a practice that belongs to Black and brown people, was created by them, and like just in a few hundred years has been something so detached. So yeah, I think that's also why in this painting, I guess I kind of place it in that grief and kind of like that middle area, that middle space of like creation, but also like it's like a new discovery that it isn't new at all. It's like an innovation that was always there. And I feel like in that kind of duality, there is so much grief because it's so unfair. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up with the tattoo context as well.
Thank you. Shout out to Jalen, who's a tattoo artist. If any of y'all looking for tattoos, they do amazing work. Io can show you exactly that. Thank you for the demonstration. And I'm going to, so personally, I love hearing artists talk about their own art by Io. But I want to hear y'all talk about other people's art, because that's exciting too. So my last question for the wrap up, because also I'm being conscious of time, is did you have a piece that struck you upon seeing the exhibit that was not yours? And do you want to say anything about it? Da, da, da. Kalkidan.
Yeah, I'm just gonna unmute myself. So I mean, I think I really, I'm always drawn to like kind of graphics and that kind of illustrative work. So Jalen's piece just really like drew my eye in, and just hearing all the levels of the symbolism behind the three heads and the imagery in this conversation, especially like I was kind of like, based on what was written there, I had an understanding, but it's even more of an understanding now. I really appreciated that. And again, Delali's piece, like when you walked into the space, like just to see it like blowing in the wind, like it was really very, very striking. So, you know, everybody's piece was very unique and had like a very interesting perspective on the subject matter. Took it so many different places that I never would have taken it. So that was really just cool to see.
Thank you. And Delali, I think you were applauding but also raising your hand, so I'm gonna pop you up next. Go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to figure it out and I ended up clapping, but
You got it. You got it.
works. Anyways, I mean, I think all of them were like really strong for various reasons. Like, yeah, something I really loved was how Mariama and Io's pieces were interacting. And they're sort of like in conversation with each other, like above. But I think also Io's piece, just the layers, and like listening to them talk about it today, just the layers behind the story, it just makes me think about so much. Like I think about like the layers between Io and their father's image, just being so distant from it, and then physically being so distant from it, and physically being so distant from a father who's been lost as well, and then compressing all those layers in the story and the limitations behind all that, compressing all that into a single digital piece is just like it's mind blowing as well. Like wow, that's all I can say.
Thank you. It is. All of you are mind blowing. Thank you all so much. Anybody else? Last questions, last words? If not, I will wrap it up. So hands, yes. Jalen, I feel like that's an applause or a hand, one of the two.
So I gotta clap. I'm clapping in. Yeah, also Ao's piece, like I literally thought that was them. I thought the photograph was them, but it was their dad. So like just hearing them speak about it more, I was just so touched, because I swear I just thought that was a photo of them the whole time. So yeah, that just was like so touching to hear all of the backstory and to see that similarity, and yeah, just yeah, how much we can look like our relatives, like people before us, and what that can actually mean when we embody them like that too. So yeah, and also Cal, your piece, you know, hearing too about the story of the spiritual man walking through the desert and how you made that new and added those references. I found that was so interesting, especially because in tattooing too, people are like connecting a lot with Ethiopian imagery. Actually, it's the newest thing I've noticed in tattooing. So anyways, but yeah, all the pieces were so amazing. Delali, your body of work is beautiful. Like, yeah, just seeing even more of your photographs after I saw your piece, I was so shook by just the color, the quality, the class. Yeah, amazing. And also to hear more about your piece, Mariama, with the, like, I loved hearing how it really came together in the end, like how it was actually such a process of finding the right images, and in the end it just came together so organically, and it was like that missing piece that was always going to be there. So yeah, amazing. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Kalkidan, you got your hand back up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say shout out to you, Sakinna. Thank you, because that was amazing. And I really also, just to touch back on a point that Delali made, like there was a lot of interaction between individual pieces and how they were situated in the space. And I really, really, really appreciated that. You know, going back and looking at everything again, it was really, really dope. So thank you for putting all this together, bringing us all together.
Thanks. All right, thank you. And I see a lot of people in the chat, and we are going to wrap up because we are hitting 7:57. Unfortunately, I'm not going to let Monique go without saying shout out again to Monique. She don't have to say anything, but Monique is running so much of OBAK along with some other lovely folks, myself now included. But none of this would have not happened if not for Monique. Thank you to Gallery. Thank you to Laura and Christina. I had a lot of wonderful ideas for setup, execution-wise, totally dependent on them. So thank you all for dealing with me and my little tiny perfectionist tendencies. Thank you all to the artists. Obviously, you guys are amazing, and I've thanked you all a bunch of times. You guys are probably sick of me at this point, but you're gonna hear it another time. Thank you for being a part. I do not honestly think this would have been complete without any of you. I was very super intentional with who I wanted to work with, and it kind of showed when I talked to all of you and you guys were thinking about the same things I was thinking about. So thank you all for being a part. Thanks everyone for coming. Please follow Gallery 101, follow OBAK, follow the artists, and any last words from the artists or from the gallery, because now I'm done.
I just want to say, come and see us. We're open from 1 to 5 today until Saturday. So we've extended. I hope that you can come and see this exhibition and watch our space on December 17th, when we'll be doing Sounds from the Great Dismal Swamp. Awesome. And a big shout out to Sakinna, who made all this possible. Thank you, Sakinna, again. And to all the artists. Yay!
All right, I'll release you off into your nights. I hope that y'all had a wonderful time and heard some cool things and processed some cool things. And please do reach out and see the pieces, talk to the artists. Yeah, have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you for coming, everybody. Bye.